together to agree on a paragraph. Everyone writes their own copy, and one member then reports to the class. And so again, as I mentioned before, this helps them to get to know one another and work together with some latitude. And the fourth then, and this is the last syllable rule, is two-syllable nouns and verbs, which I think is a pretty common rule, but again, it can be used in context with the group work that we're talking about. For most nouns with two syllables, the stress falls on the first syllable. For example, paper, English, country, laptop, finger, etc. So if a noun has two syllables, usually, there are many exceptions. There are exceptions everywhere, of course, but usually if the noun has two syllables, the stress is on the first. With verbs that are two syllables, usually the stress is on the second. For example, agree, dispute, prepare, propose, etc. So nouns with two syllables, stress is on the first. Verbs with two syllables, the stress is on the second. Okay, in their groups, this actually, we can give them a little more specific guidelines here, because the idea is to get them to use words that function both as nouns and verbs, because there are many of them. So in their groups, you can ask them to choose, again, I give them the latitude on purpose, choose a theme or topic and write a brief paragraph using 4 or 5 of the following words, all of which can be used either as nouns or verbs. And I would ask the students in their groups to use 2 or 3 particularly as verbs and 2 or 3 particularly as nouns. So for example, conflict or conflict. Conflict is the noun, of course. Conflict would be the verb, etc. Present, present, and down the line. All of these can be used either as nouns or verbs. And again, ask students to work with both of them in that regard. Okay, and as I've been giving the same refrain throughout, each group chooses a different member to present their paragraph every time, or whatever they're working on in their groups. Okay. What I'd like to do is to conclude with a couple of more, what I'd like to do is to press and repeat some of the things I've said about collaborative work, but also add a couple of things as well. Because I do think that group work and collaboration is so important in any class, particularly a speaking class. And first, as I've said earlier on, it promotes agency, confidence, and helps students learn from experience, from their own and from their others. And it does all of these good things that many of us already know. Group work is very difficult, though. It's difficult for students and for teachers. Students, as we know, generally are not used to working together. They're used to sitting and just receiving information, and they're used to working by themselves. They get a grade, and that's how it is. So students aren't used to it. Teachers also don't like to use it very often because it's sort of intimidating for teachers in that teachers give up some control. When you ask students to work in groups, you're opening the door for a couple of things. But as I continue to say, the advantages far, far, far outweigh any of the disadvantages. And there are techniques. If we can work with group work, these are only a few suggestions that I've offered here today, but if we can work with a couple of these, there will be a sense of control. And not only that, there will be a greater sense of control, and it will be mutual, not so much just from the teacher to the student. So it is difficult. We know that students aren't used to it, and teachers are often afraid of it. But if we can just do a couple of things, as I say here, as I mentioned earlier, if you ask students to name their groups, and if you ask students, or if you require students to keep the groups the same all semester, these are two very important things that I want to stress, because both of those, asking them to name their groups and keeping the groups the same throughout the semester, foster identity, which in turn fosters confidence, etc., etc. Okay, and the last two things that I would like to offer is, in addition to naming them and keeping them the same all semester, is to use them often, for teachers to use them as much as possible throughout the class. This is important because I think, well, in my case, and I think in too many cases in the past, sometimes teachers only use group work, they use it very sparingly. They use it maybe for the first week or two, and students get the sense that this is not really a part of the class, that it's maybe sort of busy work or something on the side, not to be taken so seriously. But so it's necessary to incorporate and to use group work very often, maybe once a week or twice a week, so that students have the idea, so that they get the sense that this is part of the class, this is part of the work they will be doing throughout the semester, and they will take it more seriously as well. The last then is what I would suggest as well, especially for a speaking class, is to ask each individual in the group to write a short reflection letter on how they themselves contributed to the group as a whole, or how they themselves contributed to the success of the group. And so each student in each group will write their own reflection letter about how they contributed to the group, and they perhaps can use this as parts of an oral exam at the end of the semester. They could use this as a base to tell the teacher how they themselves, what they themselves did to help the group evolve as a whole. The reason I suggest this is if we place the focus on the students themselves, it takes away the opportunity or the tendency for students to say, oh, other members didn't do this, or so-and-so did not do that, etc. It asks them to look at themselves and how they worked and what they did or what they did not do to contribute to the group. And so that is a point of focus that I think is important. If we ask them to write a reflection letter to focus on themselves, what did they do, what did they not do, what would they do differently, things along those lines. So, okay, well, that's all I have for today, and I hope that was helpful. Again, the things I stress the most is use groups often, ask students to name their groups, keep them the same throughout the whole semester, and try maybe a reflection letter that leads to sort of an individual oral presentation to the teacher. And I wish you luck. Thank you very much for your time.